Me being from Guatemala, we celebrate September a lot. It's kind of weird how it sort of starts in the middle and ends in the middle of another month. For a lot of us in Central America, it is important. It's a time where a lot of us, saw independence. So, like in my country, for example, in Guatemala, independence was, already a hard reach, given there has been like conflict and war in it. I think it's even more kind of impactful now, having survived all the trial and tribulation. Like every time we get to celebrate it again, it's a lot more impactful. And I'm not there obviously, but it's nice to be able to have that sort of pride that it's small and resilient, but it's there. For me, my heritage, in the beginning when I was younger, I thought my heritage had to do with only speaking Spanish and sort of being there. And now that I'm older and I've had a more like nuanced take on my culture in general, I realize now that there were things that were kind of like taken from me. Like I had a grandma who was indigenous, who spoke the language, who had that culture, but as a result of just wanting to survive essentially in a country where these qualities weren't really that embraced, like that sort of vanished when she passed. So for me, my culture isn't so much only speaking Spanish, nor is it, visiting Guatemala or going to Guatemala when I have the chance. It's more so trying to implement things from that country, from my country, into my everyday life. So if it's food, music, everyday rituals, I feel like that's honoring my culture more than just speaking Spanish. I'll never forget that one time my 5th grade teacher had sat us all down, and she's like, when I look at this classroom, I see Americans, but when Americans look at you, they do not see Americans. And so she had said that, and as a kid, I didn't get it. I didn't really understand, because when we were talking about Thanksgiving and all that, we would talk about like tamales, we would talk about like, the foods that we ate at home culturally. So like for me, it would be like calabaza and miel, right? Like I didn't really get pumpkin pie. What I got was like literally like stewed pumpkin in what is essentially sugar water. Like it's the unhealthiest thing on earth, but I have some in my fridge because it's really good. She sat us down and she's like, you know what? You're gonna think it's weird, but you're gonna thank me later. So before we had our Thanksgiving break, she brought us pumpkin pie, she brought us apple pie, ice cream, like pieces of turkey. And she's like, I wanna give you guys like an American Thanksgiving. You guys might not know what that looks like, because we were doing word searches and some of it was like watching football and it was like eating pumpkin pie. And we were like, we don't do this. And we were confused, like we didn't know better. So I think food really, looking back on it, like I'm very grateful for that, because it was an eye-opening experience. It helped me understand that I didn't feel alienated by it. Like she was also an immigrant. So she understood how like sheltered we were. Like we lived in a bubble. We went to a predominantly Black and brown school. And I think she's like, when you go home, I want you guys to eat all of the tamales you can. Like I want you to just pig out on everything that you like know and love. And I really like food. Food is probably the number one way I keep in touch with my culture. I think food supersedes like pretty much any cultural thing you can carry. Like the way you dress can change within one generation. Like I look radically different from my grandma. Like just the fact that I wear pants is like crazy. But yeah, I think food is a good way of showing culture. There's a stereotype, the obvious stereotype, that we're here coming to this country as a failure of our own countries. Like, oh, you're going to the US because your country is clearly screwed up one way or another. And I think that is a very unfair thing to say. Guatemala, we haven't industrialized into the same degree that the US has, right? Like we honor a lot of the natural resources that we have in the country. We choose not to, obliterate a mountain to build a freeway through it. We would rather drive around the mountain and like get motion sickness and like fall off the edge of it, because we'd rather do that than to just, we honor those resources. Granted, we don't have very many of them, but, like my dad came to this country and, he seems to forget it. Man gets his citizenship and he seems to forget how he got here or why he got here. But he came here as a result of asylum, right? I think a big misconception in the Hispanic community is that we are like wholly unified. And I think that's a really dangerous misconception because it erases a lot of the issues that we have within our own community. Like if we're all the same, that's a huge misconception. When we look at immigration, no one wants to uproot their life and leave everything they know and love behind. Like no one wants to go through the process of learning an entirely new language at an older age. No one wants to go through the process of potentially leaving their kids behind for the sake of maybe the opportunity of getting more money, right? I think that misconception that like, oh, well, all of you are like this whole like raza unida, like it's a nice theory, it's a nice thing to hold. But I think for the most part, there's more work that needs to be done, right? Like we have a lot of injustices within our own community. And oftentimes when we point at other people and we're saying like, they're the bullies, they're the bad guys, like we have to look at our own communities. I am of the belief that certain stereotypes do exist for a reason. I think for me to say that like my grandma didn't hit me with a sandal, that's a fact. Like that's a comment, that's a thing that almost all of us could relate on, right? I think those things are endearing, right? That's why comedians like George Lopez exist and like Fluffy Iglesias exist, right? These are stereotypes and things that, and maybe not even stereotypes, they're just common sort of rites of passage we all go through, right? It's not stereotypical to say that most Hispanic girls have a quinceañera. Like most of us do. I didn't have the privilege because my parents were like, you get a quince or a car, and I didn't get either. So, what was the question? Anyways, but no, like it's not stereotypical for me to say that I ate beans and rice growing up. That was all I ate. I hated it as a kid. I would get smacked if I didn't like put a pot of beans on the thing. Like I had, I guess you could say, those stereotypes. I think that certain stereotypes, if done really well, are really honoring to the community. It shows you that you really understand sort of the struggle we went through, right? A lot of these stereotypes do come from like our economic situation, right? Like a lot of these stereotypes come from a common struggle. Like stealing Tupperware is a huge offense to like your grandparents and your aunts, right? That's because we can't afford more than what we have. Do I think that there's appropriate stereotyping and appropriate representation in the media? Probably not. And I think right now, maybe the pendulum has swung, not maybe too far. I can't help but feel for a lot of representation that we have today is very hollow. That is only there to ensure that the population is there, not because they want to honor it, not because they want to care. Like you can tell when people put a lot of work and a lot of effort into connecting with who they want to see it, like who they want to consume, right? Or you know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm trying to say. You see when people put effort. And I think one really good example of that is Miles Morales in Into the Spider-Verse. I think he's such a good example of that. Like within 5 minutes, you know that this is like an Afro-Latino kid. Like he says bye to his dad in English. He says bye mama in Spanish. Like she's talking about rice. And you see him walk with like Nike Dunks. And you see that these shoes are so like powerful in their respective community. You see that within 5 minutes without having to say like, oh, I'm a Afro-Latino kid. Like within 5 minutes, you got the gist. He's saying hi to his friends in English. He's saying hi to his friends in Spanish. He's dabbing them up. He's switching it based on who he's with. I think that within 5 minutes, you were able to see that this was something that they really, really took into account and something they really cared for. And then you look at other movies like, say, like Big Hero 6, where apparently one of them was like Latina, but the only indication that she was that she said hero different. That was it. That was the only thing that could have ever hinted that maybe that she was Latina. And it's almost kind of like insulting. What did this character offer apart from just saying like, I am Latina? Nothing, not really. There was no real substance to it. It is now understood that we are a marketable demographic, right? That we are a demographic that can be, kind of pulled into movie theaters, pulled into certain events. Sometimes I feel like the representation is really good and you can tell it's very honored and you can tell that it's really held with a deft hand. And for others, you can tell it's like, damn, like you just want us there for money, huh? Like you just want us there to buy some tickets. Having worked with a lot of students, For me, at least, like I was raised to be a little like, not, I wouldn't say aggressive, but I would say just to like assert yourself, right? I think a lot of kids benefit from sort of like a gentle, like, hey, you need to do this, but you also gotta, pick up the slack a bit. Kids benefit from structure. For me, for example, I didn't realize it growing up, but I had a huge advantage over my classmates because my parents spoke English. I didn't realize that until much later in life. I didn't realize that like I had such a privilege in that my parents could speak the same language as me. Sometimes a lot of my kids in my experience were really defeated because they're like, I don't get it, and no one can help me. Sometimes you just gotta tell them like, okay, I know it probably sucks to hear this because your parents probably tell you this all the time, pero ponte las pilas. Like you gotta, come on, like this, we can't do this anymore. Like you have to get your high school diploma. We gotta move up in the social ladder. Like we cannot live like this for the rest of our lives. Like we have to do better. For me personally, it was like my parents couldn't help me with my homework. And then I was being told like, you gotta go to college. Well, like how do I do that? I don't know. I heard college is expensive. Did you save up for any of it? Hell no. I'm not saving for my own retirement. Well, damn, it's a blessing by fire, really, right? And that's why, like, my parents they're my parents, but they did not understand why I chose community college and turned down like 5 acceptances. And it was because like money was tight. We do not have the funds for this, big man. We do not have the money for this. And I think having really like honest conversation, like even with parents, will help kids in their education. I think having that more sort of stern conversation with not only students, but sort of telling them like you have to do better for yourself, and having that conversation with parents about like you have to support your child in this way. Like this isn't like in Guatemala where I can just say like, hey, I got straight A's and I'm going to school for free for the rest of my life or whatever. It's different. It's a new ball game. Like I hear so many of my friends say like, my parents don't get why I'm at a Starbucks for 5 hours a day for one homework assignment. Like parents just cannot empathize because to them it's like inconceivable. How can one assignment possibly take 5 hours? Or how can one test possibly take this long? Or why is it that school is like 5 to 8 hours long? Like I can't understand that, right? I think that comes from like misconception. Like a lot of our families really, really emphasize education and really emphasize all these really high standards that they quite frankly don't meet themselves, and put them on their kids. And for a lot of kids, it's like you see that their parents are planting a seed in them and they're really hoping that it'll grow and it'll turn into something. But I think having a really honest conversation with parents like, hey, your child needs to do this and your child needs to do this and this is how you support them is probably more profound than just a conversation between a teacher and a student, because the student still has to fight for their life once they get back home. I know for me, in my case, like most of my classmates, their parents didn't even pass like a middle school education, but were expected to go to high school and college and do all these amazing things and then provide for them when they're old and can't wipe themselves. Like these are all things and expectations and standards that we have. And this isn't even mentioning the like societal expectations, like the cultural expectations, like girls are supposed to, maintain these standards for themselves and not their brothers or whatever. This isn't even mentioning all of that. Like a lot of my fellow friends who are girls, like they struggle because like my dad cannot let me pass the house at 6 o'clock. After 6 o'clock, I can't study at a Starbucks anymore. Like I think those cultural misunderstandings and sort of not accepting those new things does more damage to our education, really more than anything else. Because I know that our parents' hearts are in the right place. Like they want us to succeed and be better than them and sort of like live this American dream. I think this idea that education is only between a teacher and a student is already a failure. Like that, you're starting off on the wrong foot. Shout out to the Spanish. Shout out to them. Like they really colonized the hell out of us. They really went out there and colonized all of Central and South America. Shout out to them. Because like now I can speak with someone from Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic or like Bolivia or something. Like that's kind of cool. Sucks how we got there, but that's kind of neat that I can like interact with somebody with such a radically different thing. I'm the bordering country to Mexico, but our food is so different from each other. That's amazing. And now imagine if you go further down south, it changes even more. Like it's so nice to see that I can kind of like pick and choose like what foods and what like ideas I want to incorporate into my own life. And that, I don't know, it's so nice that it's such a broad scope of things. Like, it's not just one country, it's not just one people or even one race. Like, it's a bunch of things. Like, was my grandma indigenous? Yeah. Do I claim indigeneity? I'm like, I'm pasty. I don't know about all that. Like, I haven't kept onto all the cultural sort of milestones that she held onto. But it's nice to be able to learn all these things and see like how rich the culture is, even like pre-colonization, right? Like all the things that we used to hold dear. Like if you ever read like a Mayan folktale, that is so cool. That's amazing. Like there are so many levels to the culture. From like you can spend your entire lifetime just studying one country. Now imagine just like all the countries that we have. Yeah, I just like it. It's cool. It's nice. Like the food's great. I get to understand memes in English and in Spanish. The Cloudy with the Chance of Meatball guy with the camera, he's from Guatemala. I never turned up so hard in a movie theater. Once he said, "Oh, I'm a doctor in Guatemala," that was amazing. Like, it's such a stupid thing, but that was amazing. And so, like, I don't know, you can't help but be prideful. And it's like, for me, in my case, like this tiny little country that has survived like 80 civil wars and like 80 coups, like, it's so nice to be able to say, like, I'm from this country that, you know, like, we pop out bananas, like, the way rabbits reproduce, but it's fun. It's nice. Like, I just like being able to, like, have such a rich culture and being able to kind of share that with others. I think it's cool.